All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is DH Thorne here. And let me configure the screen so we can see everybody. How's it going? I will be here with my special friend. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody in the audience, if you would, please. He is a gentle patron of mine, a friend of mine, someone who I've been talking to for a little bit. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to everybody at home.
Good evening, DH. Yes, I am Saramadus, and I've been fascinated with and researching and working with the occult now for a little over half a century. And yeah, it's been a long time. And recently became aware of Mr. Thorne's most excellent book, Become the Maelstrom, and found a lot in that system that really connects with where I've been going metaphysically, and been working with him ever since.
And it's been a real pleasure to talk to you too, because you do have like a wealth of experience. You've been, just in our conversations, I feel like it's like the new and the old coming together. When I say old, I mean the tried and true in a lot of ways, coming together, talking about the differences, but also the things that are the same, the things that we've noticed that are identical from the stuff you've been practicing for, like you said, many decades now, and the learning it's been giving you on your end for what you're doing, and then how they compare to the things that I've been doing. And it's just been a blast. You're part of my Sunday crew. I enjoy my Sunday crew. My Sunday guys are always fun to talk to. You guys always have interesting stories and things to tell. Not that the other ones are not, but yeah. So let's check the chat here. Hey, looks like we got one. Let me buzz in my new. Thank you, Zion. It's really awesome. And I notice you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you for that donation very much. Thank you. No, Cat, you're not late. You actually got here just in time. We literally just started. I know you are, sweetie. It's good to see you, and we'll talk again on our private time soon too. So let's see who's here. Let me scroll up a little bit. Where's my mouse at? So we got Sam A. We got Carrie Darkstar, my sister. Jason Michael, what's up? Angry Finger. Watch out for that one, guys. The Angry Finger is like the evil eye, but it's the Angry Finger. I like it. Let's see.
A Saturnian finger, perhaps?
Oh, yeah. Put a ring on it. Custom made incense. What's up, Jason? Michael, I said hi to you. Lawrence Espinoza, you made it for one. Yeah, you haven't seen one of these in a little while. It's been a while since I've seen you. Diamond Antenna, what's up, Diamond? Zion Scriven, as always. He's got to keep the joke going, he says. Every time he comes on, he gives me a $6, some form of $6, thing, but he doesn't, the amount changes, but he always says, notice me, senpai. I love that. Suicide Bunny, 2000 Torres, I know who that is. I hope everything's going good for you tonight, and I hope the stuff we talked about is going to go good. It's good to see. So let's delve into, first of all, because I want to interview you a little bit. Everybody knows so much about me, and this will give me something to talk about, because there's things I do want to talk about. I do want to bring up maybe a little bit of current events. Hopefully people don't mind a little bit of current events, because things are heating up in the world. And it is now time, I think, for people who practice magic to not hide their, we'll say, their power. I think it's time people need to start acting like we have control over things a little bit and make sure we influence things for the better. But I'll leave that up to you, what you think that means. But we'll talk about some of the issues that are important right now, maybe a little bit. I don't want to depress everybody with politics, of course, but there's a lot of things going on. And if you've seen a lot in the occult, you've seen a lot in politics over the years too, I would assume. Is that right?
Oh, yes. And between just seeing the changing in alignments over the years, and more recently, some big surprises that I expect we'll go into soon.
Yeah, some very big surprises. All right, so now you've been practicing for a while. What styles did you start with? What are you ending on, so to speak? What are you on now? What methods and styles or pantheons or methods have you used going back to your beginning of all of this?
Earliest beginning was actually in my childhood, and one sees things on television, and very early on, I got fascinated with both the tarot and the I Ching. Um, couldn't get my traditional Catholic parents to even buy me a tarot deck, but I used to. When my mother would go shopping and my father would go off to read the paper or watch the girls, I'd either sneak into the library and curl up in a hidden corner somewhere with Russell Hope Robbins' Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology, or Zolar's Encyclopedia of Ancient and Forbidden Knowledge. I know those seem pretty
I haven't heard of half of them, so
pretty kitschy now, but to a child in elementary school, they can seem pretty fascinating. And really was first able to begin my serious studies and practical work when I was in graduate school. Although throughout high school days, I picked up little pieces out of classes on psychology and even philosophy, and side readings on the side, that I was able to begin to assemble into the beginnings of a magical and occult worldview, aided somewhat along the way by the works of H.P. Lovecraft, which I became a huge enthusiast of when, first of all, one of my fellow students wrote an English paper about Lovecraft, and that got me quite interested. And then I found a copy at a yard sale for 10 cents of the Ballantine paperback of The Lurking Fear and Other Stories, and that got me hooked. And quickly I managed to buy up copies of and read my way through his entire corpus of fiction in about a year or two.
That takes a little while. Yeah, it's a lot of descriptive writing. Is a lot because he's interesting. I like listening to his stories, like by a good narrator. Like I go to Horror Babble and a couple of others, and I love it. But it's oof. If I was reading it, sometimes I'm just like, having someone narrate it well is really good because he's very descriptive in his writing until you get to the monster. And then it's like all words that defy explanation. And I know some critics of his work point that out, and they say, well, I don't like how he builds up this monster, but then he doesn't really portray it. It's just the person's dead, And I go, well, that makes it so much scarier because what you can produce in your mind is always so much more.
Right. He's describing the not the monster, but rather the effects of beholding it upon the beholder's consciousness, and allows your imagination to go in those directions. One thing I also figured out in those days is reading Lovecraft with a dictionary handy does wonders for one's vocabulary.
I got all the words, so I'm good. But no, I feel you because when I was younger, I remember I forget what the first words I really didn't know, and I asked my mom, what does that mean? She's like, well, get a dictionary. I'm like, what? Can't you just tell me? She says, no, you learn more by grabbing the dictionary and looking it up. And I have a pretty good vocabulary. I don't know many people that have much better, but I'm sure they're there, obviously. But I have a pretty good vocabulary. It's fun to be able to, mince words, shall we say, with use the bigger words. But I'm better at writing them than I am remembering them while I'm talking. So with all of these things, so you ended up. Lovecraft was inspirational to you in a lot of ways. And how did that influence, what you did? Did you try to work with the Lovecraftian beings? Did you think they were real? Or how did you interpret that end of that spectrum?
At that time, I mostly took the universe as a kind of a Weltanschauung framework, as it were, in which I was able to piece together, bits from philosophy, bits from pop metaphysics, bits from psychology, and so forth. Didn't really start doing any practical work, as I say, until I was in grad school. I dated a girl for a while who was a Wiccan, and she kind of introduced me to some things. And I also had a gaming buddy that, when he found out I was interested, dusted off some of the research he had done in years past. And we got a little project going together where we did a lot of experimentation on scrying, both in crystal balls and in various types of mirrors. As a matter of fact, out of that research, he eventually published a book called Exploring Scrying under the pseudonym Ambrose Hawk, which is actually a pretty good book on the subject.
I'll have to see you're so well read, and that's also why I find it fascinating to talk to you, because I will be, you'll be asking me things. We'll be talking about things in our little conversations, and you'll say, well, that's a lot like this, or that reminds me of that. And you'll have these questions built up that I'm like, ooh, I never heard of these books before. Like, I got to look this stuff up. It's fascinating to me, like when someone's got this much study and they know so much, and they're still in love with the path. I mean, it's not like been there, done that. It's like you're just in love with all of it. What would you say was your first manifestation, if any, when doing magic? Has your magic been manifestation oriented or personal growth oriented? Both? What would you say? And if so, what would be something you would point to and say, hey, I had this experience that was like, this is proof positive. I can't explain it any other way. I did a ritual and my will manifested. Is there a story like that you would recount to anybody?
Well, some of the really, really, really earliest stuff when I was first getting started, there were, in our experiments with crystal gazing and scrying, I sometimes got some very vague visions, or very vague visual impressions. I was actually running up against what I really appreciated in the presentation you gave on the fact that a lot of times we are actually experiencing visions and don't realize it because we've had the wrong expectations. Mm-hmm. I think that's a real key that I really wish I would have known about 40 years ago. Would have saved me. Would have actually probably made me realize I'd gotten a lot further than I thought I had. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's actually a book I'm reading from a friend of mine named Brandon. I don't know if he wants me to say his whole name. I guess I'll say it anyway. But Brandon Knight. He's a good gentleman. He's another person who's enrolled in the program that you're in. And, a lot of the times, like, I even hesitate to call it mentorship. We're more like we all have our experiences, and I don't see myself necessarily as a teacher with all of you guys. Some of you guys are you're professionals already in what you do, or you just have lifetimes of experience, and you're just looking for someone else that has a professional attitude about it to talk to. And this gentleman, he gifted me a book, and it's called A Deed Without a Name, and I've been reading it. I've been taking my time with it because I don't like reading other people's work much. But I read maybe the first 20%, and I said, this person nails it on so many levels of what real magic is experienced like. And it's so refreshing, because even a lot of accomplished occultists in the community don't actually really portray this, and I think accurately. They make it sound like it's always going to be Hollywood special effects. I think that's because people expect that a little bit, and so they want it to be that way. And when it's not, they get disappointed. And I'm not, anyone who's watched my channel long enough knows that I always say, I'm not saying it isn't ever like that. It's just that you can't look for it to be that way. But this book goes into the things, talking about how some of the wildest tales that we read in antiquity, witches riding in ladle spoons, as or using broomsticks, or riding cats and bats and things around to do what they do. And, the people from antiquity would look at these things and say, they were really doing it, and they were really, they would have it in their mind like they're really doing it. And so it would pass through our cultural heritage that this was a thing that was literal, when in reality it was mostly the result of trance experience. It was mostly the result of psychedelics or something internal. And what's exciting about that is that it validates what we experience, of course. That's always very exciting. But it also opens us up to this idea that the ancients also didn't see reality the way we do. In the modern era, people have been conditioned and conformed to separate our internal world from the external and see them not as equal. We are conditioned to see the internal world as separate and inferior and subjected to the objective world. In other words, what you think is a product of what's coming into your head from outside, rather than what you experience is actually the other way around. It's actually more like a radar, like you send out your senses in a way, and you bring back information, and then you form a picture about what's there based on your own internal interpretation of the information. So modern people, I think, have it backwards. The ancients had it kind of like 50-50. If a person from even as recently as maybe the 1400s, 1300s, when all this witchcraft stuff was really becoming, the witch trials and all that was starting to really become popular. Because don't forget, for a while, witchcraft wasn't illegal. It was a thing that people did. I mean, they kept it a little bit on the down low, but it was a lot more acceptable until a certain point. Then they began all the witch hunts and all that stuff. I do believe that for a long time, people in those periods didn't make a distinction between, at least not a hard distinction, between what happened inside and what was on the outside. That doesn't mean there was no distinction. It just means if they had a vision, an imaginary vision, if you will, of a spirit in their presence, they didn't discount it as quickly as we would today. Whereas today we just go, oh, that's just my imagination. They might give it a double take, and really, especially if it was vivid, especially if there's a vividness to it. And we've all had those vivid hallucinatory experiences. Even me, I'm getting better at it. There's a gentleman in the comments right now, Lawrence Espinoza. We've talked about, being less capable of seeing perhaps in our third eye, like it's not as visual for some people, if at all. Some people can't visualize at all. So luckily, I'm finding out I'm not one of those people. It's just a skill I've had to relearn, I guess you could say. So what do you think about, that kind of stuff? Where do you lie on that spectrum? Do you think that we should expect really vivid experiences, or are they often subtle? Do you think that they're often just things that we normally ignore?
Well, one thing that I think is interesting is, at least in my own experience, visionary experiences that I've had in doing things like scrying are often very, very vague and evanescent. But at the same time, the visionary experiences I have in dreams have always been incredibly vivid and sometimes pretty apocalyptic and spectacular.
Those are my favorite dreams. Like, I don't really have, for me, a nightmare isn't what other people would call a nightmare for the most part. I have what other people would call a scary dream, and I'm like, yeah, this is the best part. And, the zombies come, the monsters come, the world's coming to an end, the planet's exploding, whatever it is, I'm not freaking out. I'm enjoying it. The ones that make me bug out is when the people that I know in real life betray me, or they're not themselves, or, stuff like that, specifically, I really, I'm not going to tell you all my deepest fears or anything, but specifically, stuff where it's family or friends or something that it hits home, those things can bother me. But the usual dreams of, like, demons flying around and monsters and all that stuff doesn't really bother me. I find it to be, like, I feel like I'm living an adventure story, and it doesn't really scare me. Even if I've been hurt, one of the things I'll tell people a lot is, in your dreams, your senses are muted a lot. Like, if you get shot, you don't feel like you got shot. Feel like you got slapped or punched or something. You don't have a knowledge of what it's like to be shot, so you don't feel being shot. You know what I mean? It's like your body rejects that agony. So yeah.
I get a lot of those. I've had dreams in which the world was ending, and I was just simply calmly observing the whole thing. All sorts of wild things where most people would experience it as a nightmare and wake up with a cold sweat. I'm just going through it. Well, this is interesting. Once when I was much younger, I had a dream in which I was confronting some sort of rather scary monster, and my response in the dream was simply to growl at it, at which point it went away. And apparently I growled so that it was loud enough that my then wife was able to hear me, and it woke her up. And she's, "What's going on?" And of course that woke me up, and I told her, "That would be just like you. Most people would under that in a dream, and they'd have woke up terrified. You growled at it and scared it away."
That's always fun. I know that, like, one of my favorite dreams that I used to have, I used to have my flying dreams. Those were obviously, you know, top 3 type of dream I could have. My UFO dreams, I used to have UFO dreams a lot, where I would be doing something normal and just like whoop, 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 like the clearest UFO you ever saw in your life would appear, and it would be in my heart like the world changed at that moment. Like in my dream, it was surreal, like the world's just changed because of that. Then I've had the dreams where I was like a wolf, like a werewolf, and I would dream that I was literally prowling around to the point where I felt viscerally the movements of my body. I felt, and this is when it got unusual, because usually, like I said, dreams are not very vivid. They're sort of muted in a way. This wasn't muted. And I've come to the conclusion that I've probably had astral, you know, encounters where I've been in the body of a wolf traveling around. I have very little doubt that that's probably what was happening. I've somehow, some way, I've gone into that and experienced it. And it was, at least I think it was a wolf. You know, it's like the feeling I got. And I'd be prowling around. It's like there's a specific way it would feel to walk and to smell, and to this. What I could see was muted a little bit. And I remember, you know, I'd be like clawing my bed essentially, and not knowing it. So I'd be having this dream, and I'd wake up, and my bed would be, sometimes it'd be like literal, like I broke a nail, or I damaged the you know, the sheets a little bit, you know, or they're certainly ripped off the bed. And, you know, I was actually animated in my sleep. So these were really interesting. And this is something that I bring up a little bit sometimes is, you know, we're talking about afterlives, we're talking about astral journeys and stuff, is that we have to remember like that we exist as like a nexus of consciousness in a material space. And we can shift that consciousness to other things, theoretically. I don't think we have conscious control over it as an ego. I don't think that's easy for us to do as an ego, because the ego doesn't necessarily go for the ride. I think the ego might go for the ride, or it might not. I haven't come to the conclusion on that. Maybe when I figure that out, I'll write some books about it. But it's an interesting thing, and it actually makes me think about telepathy a little bit. I sort of had an epiphany one of these days where I was sitting here working with my spirits, and I said, okay, obviously I have a gift for empathy. I can feel people really well. I can predict people pretty well. I can do all these things, but I can't hear their thoughts in my head. And the spirit said, well, why do you expect to hear their thoughts in your head? Don't you know what they're thinking anyway? And I kind of like, my jaw hung open, and I thought, well, yeah, not always, but I feel like a good percentage of the time I can actually predict what people are thinking. Maybe not to the word, but to the spectrum. You know what I mean? I can predict they're thinking about this. The thing I said bothered them. I can predict a lot about what they're thinking, but not the actual words. And I thought to myself, well, hey, what if, just like having an open third eye is not necessarily a vivid vision, what if it's like that? It's sometimes just an intuitive knowledge. What if you can read minds without hearing thoughts in your head? You know, like they show in the movies, where if I was reading your mind right now, I'd be hearing, wow, this is kind of like cool. And, you know, like I would be hearing a whispering or something, right? But I would instead sort of have a feeling of what you're thinking instead, and just sort of intuitively guess. Like synchronistically just seem to get it. Not that I could do it reliably, otherwise I'd probably be a quadruple billionaire by now, but, you know, obviously enough that I feel it. I'm sure a lot of people watching this can relate to that feeling where they, and maybe yourself, where you'll be sitting there thinking about something that someone must be thinking and go, wow, I guess, is this what they're thinking? Am I getting close? What would you say? Do you think that maybe have you ever had an experience like that?
On occasion, or this also is probably an experience a lot of people have had. Frequently, I will call someone only to find out they're trying to call me at the same time, and we got a busy signal, or they were just thinking of calling me, or vice versa. They call me and I was thinking of calling them.
Yeah, that's a very common one, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And, you know, in situations where the other person would have no way of knowing, you know, that you were thinking of calling them at that particular moment. That's
always like fun for me. Those kind of manifestations are fun. I wish it was easier to make them happen. I'm not saying you can't. Joseph Nunn did a video I guess it was an older video. He's got a video where he creates what I call a psi ball or a chi ball. He creates an energy ball and fills it with the intention of call me. Usually puts the name in there. Call me, call me, call me, or something like that. Give a very simple intention into the ball, and when he feels it's charged enough, he, in his own way, shoots it at the person. And it helps if he can visualize where they would be, what direction in real life, and he sends it to them, and hopes that they will get that message and respond with it.
Now that sounds like a very interesting experiment. I'm going to have to try that one sometime.
I've used it a little bit, not his method, but I've used it. I find that with people, there's just like with hypnosis, some people are more susceptible to being receptive to that message, and they don't know it. I have some friends who I will be talking to or be planning to talk to, and I will, be like, right now, I'm waiting for you, and I will make like a statement, almost like imagine Thor's hammer landing on a stone, boof, and feel that resonance just go through the universe, just this solid statement, and sure enough, like within seconds, like I'll get a boop, I'm ready, almost like they heard me. With you guys, I can often tell when you guys are waiting for me, but long before you type the, we're ready when you are, Thorne, and I'm like, yeah, I'm running a little bit late. I know, but I mean that's predictive, of course, but it's interesting. It's interesting, to have that happen, even if it's sometimes it will definitely, when you start noticing those synchronistic moments and you start using them, and you start thinking to yourself, what was I doing when that happened? What was I thinking about when I got that impression? When you start, applying that little scientific question and answer thing to it, you can sometimes tease out what maybe helped it happen. What mind state was I in? Was I relaxing? Was I upset? Was I already thinking about the person and all that kind of good stuff? So yeah, I guess what we didn't get to though was a matter. What kind of things have you manifested through your work? If anything substantial, has there been anything? Have you changed your career, changed your life? Have you found, what kind of things have happened through magic for you?
Well, this actually brings me to my one previous experience with the Goetia prior to working with Become the Maelstrom was about 30 years ago. When I was active in the Temple of Set, one of my fellow priests expressed a desire to experiment with the Goetia, and he wanted to know if anybody was interested. And I'd been kind of fascinated with it for a while, so I said, "Yeah, I'm down. Let's plan something." So we settled on the 26th spirit, which. At the time, the copy of the Goetia I had spelled the name with an acute accent on the final E, so that we pronounced it Bune.
Yeah. Bune,
nowadays, I hear it more pronounced as Boon or Buna.
Yeah.
Or as Bim, which is or Bime, which would have been the alternate spelling. Mm-hmm. So we started making preparations. The other fellow had lived in a loft in an old warehouse in kind of an industrial inner city area that had an attached tower, which had at one time had machinery in it. It was one of these big old reinforced concrete factory buildings from the early 20th century. Mm-hmm. And since there was no longer anything in the top floor of the tower, the landlord allowed the people who had lofts in the building, a lot of whom were occultists. There was my friend, and there was also a Wicca coven in there, and so everybody would use the tower for their ritual work. This was a huge cubic shaped chamber with no windows at the top of this concrete tower with a tarmac floor. So okay, this will make a pretty nice ritual chamber. And so I started out with the methodology we used was in some ways extremely traditional Solomonic, but at the same time from what would now be called a demonolatry perspective.
Okay.
Yep. My copy of the Goetia that I had at the time was the De Laurence edition, but I was able to get photocopies of Crowley's versions of the invocations from a friend who had the Weiser edition, and these were the ones where Crowley wrote large portions of them in Enochian, which I was pretty fascinated with because we had at the local OTO lodge at the time was operating something called the Center for Enochian Studies that I was very active in. Didn't do much practical work with it, but got a lot of theoretical knowledge and a lot of knowledge of the language.
Right.
So what I proceeded to do was to take Crowley's Enochianized Solomonic invocations, translate them from Enochian back into English, rewrite them into demonolatrous language, and then retranslate them back into Enochian. So they were the Solomonic invocations rendered into Enochian, but rewritten so as to welcome and greet the spirit, as opposed to ordering it around and threatening it.
Yep.
And the next thing I did was I had a lot of OTO friends, and at the time, the local lodge had relocated from an old house in one part of the neighborhood to another in another neighborhood, and but the old lodge building had remained kind of a Thelemic group house, and there was a smaller Thelemic group house next to it. And in the smaller house, there was one fellow who was a metallurgist, and one of the things he liked to do was make talismanic seals out of the various sacred metals that he would etch using acid. And you'd get the pattern by painting it on in advance using a special asphalt paint, and then he would soak it in the acid and then clean the paint off, and then you had the etched sigil. So he agreed to work with me that if I actually painted the sigils on with the masking agent and let him do the etching with the acid, that he would give me a discounted rate on it, which was a win-win all around as far as I was concerned, because I got to put the actual work into making the talisman to the extent that I was able without the equipment, and then we got a nice finished product. So I got to make it in copper because, according to the original text of the Lemegeton, copper is the element appropriate to dukes, or as we later found out, duchesses.
Right. I love when the gender truth comes out. When you start researching a lot of these spirits and you go back to who they're based on, what gods, what other beings they're often based on, and finding out like Beleth is actually Belet, the female Mesopotamian title for lady, and that there's so many like that, and it's really fun. But we also have to remember that for them, it's still just a mask. Their energy might be more female, but they can present as a male. They can be. It's just a mask. It's just a shape we put on them to not define them, but to work with them. So, yeah.
That's very true, because if one looks at the different planes and levels of gender, on the one hand you have the physical level, which is defined by physical anatomy, which of course is completely irrelevant in non-physical spirits, spirits who are not focused on the physical plane, which is the same reason why I firmly believe that it is possible for a single consciousness to manifest in different genders during different incarnations, and why these spirits can, of course, manifest as whatever they want. I remembered recently in the original Ghostbusters movie where they're dealing with this supposed Sumerian entity named Gozer. I don't really know if there was a Sumerian deity named that or not. There may have been, there may not have been, but I haven't heard of it outside that context. But basically, it shows up at the place it's supposed to show up and winds up looking kind of like this this kind of punk rock girl with a bodysuit made of soap bubbles.
Interesting.
They got a rather famous Eastern European dancer to play the role, which was useful because she did a lot of acrobatics in the course of that scene. But at one point, one of the Ghostbusters crew asked the other, "I thought Gozer was supposed to be a guy," and gets the response back, "Gozer can be whatever Gozer wants."
That's true. It really is.
That was probably my second favorite line out of the scene. My favorite was when Gozer asks Dan Aykroyd in this very, very distorted, gravelly voice, "Are you a god?"
Yeah.
And he kind of shrugs and says no, and then she comes back, "Then die!" and blasts them all with lightning. They managed to keep from getting blown off the side of the building, but one of Aykroyd's compatriots tells him, "When somebody asks you if you're a god, you say yes."
I think not only that, I think there's an interesting metaphor, or maybe not a metaphor, but an interesting allegory there, in that you'll notice that the spirit probably would have just believed them if they said yes. And there's maybe an interesting piece of gnosis there for people who really want to look, because I am a firm believer that our pop culture isn't simply stories. I think that they are either intentional or unintentionally inspired by true spiritual truth. Art imitates life, and life imitates art, right? And spirituality is a kind of art in a lot of ways, at least how it's expressed. Okay, and metaphysics is a kind of science and philosophy, and so on. We can pair these things off. But what I found is, even in pop culture, there's these little seeds of truth, and there obviously has to be for it to have a good story. I mean, Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey and how Star Wars is better because of it. He helped write the, or at least show them what that means, and they incorporated those ideas into that. And you have, the hero's journey is such an important story that's in every culture, and how we tell that story defines our culture in so many ways. The things that we think of as important, or how we define our heroes, and so on. And these are spiritual values and ideas. And our pop culture today contains a lot of that as well. And so when we look at Ghostbusters, which is this hokey little thing, but let's be fair. What's his name was a genius in terms of directing and writing. And rest in peace, there, buddy. The guy who did, I always forget his name. The guy who played Egon. But anyway.
Harold Ramis.
Yeah, Harold Ramis. Yeah, Harold Ramis. And he was always really good with deeper things. I mean, he did Groundhog Day. He wrote that, and these are deep subjects that he's able to do. And he somehow inserts these goofy ideas as comedy, and there's things hidden in these things which people may not notice. But that is an important one. That, are you a god? Always say yes. When you're working with the spirit world, okay, there's different choices you can make on how to approach them. You can approach them as a sniveling coward. You can approach them as an emissary of a higher spirit, a servant of Yahweh, and they must do your bidding, and because of it, Solomon taught you the secrets. You can approach them as a commander who commands things in an equal sense. You can approach them in a disrespectful way. There's so many different ways you can approach them, but the way that they respond to best, I have found, is when you treat them with respect, but with your own authority. They don't like cowards. They don't like snivelers. They don't like people like that. If a spirit like Bunet or Baal or Beleth or any of these come to you, and they say,
that was exactly what we experienced, because once we got all of the equipment together, we decided that the other fellow wanted to be the seer, and wanted to scry the whole thing in a crystal ball while I performed the invocation slash evocation, which I was fine with that. I got everything set up. We put a thurible on the floor made out of brass, and loaded it up with with those little charcoal tablets that you could get at the voodoo stores and botanicas, and got them stoked up really good, and put a boatload of frankincense and myrrh on it, and kept feeding it the whole time so as to present enough billowing clouds of incense to fill that really huge chamber.
Yeah.
We did do a circle, but we put the seer in the middle of the circle, which later on, when I recounted this story to some folks in the Ordo Templi Astartes, Pope Runyon's group, which works a lot with the Goetia, several of his senior adepti got rather big-eyed, and one of them said, you do realize that was not an evocation, that was an invocation.
Yeah.
Come to think of it, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely invited Bunet into the circle. And to make a long story short, all of the visual and auditory impressions of Bunet were obtained through the seer, and he communicated that she was in fact very pleased at being called upon and welcomed in such a polite and gracious and respectful manner, and enjoyed conversing with the seer, and basically pretty much offered to grant our requests without requiring any sort of pact or offering beyond the incense and candles that had been offered.
Mm-hmm.
And
that does happen a lot too. It's something that I found when you start working with a new spirit, they're often very quick to give you little things,
mm-hmm.
and then after a while you got to work for them a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they give you a free taste or two.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like it's because, well, E.A. Quetting makes a good point. These are energy and they want to act, okay? And there's also this idea that I believe that because they don't work against natural forces, okay? They don't fight against the forces of nature. They don't break the laws of nature. And I think that what happens is we build up energetic blockages, we build up energetic tensions, we build up things in our lives and in our character and our story that create tension in our energy expression. I'm using the word energy as a catch-all for action. When these spirits encounter us, they can see this imbalance, this tension maybe, and it's child's play for them sometimes to just pluck that little string, remove that little barrier, or pull out the little hangnail that's keeping us from letting that balance happen. So for example, if you call upon King Person and you're seeking King Person's help with financial matters, although I wouldn't recommend him for business so much as I found that he's really good at inspiring you with ideas or talents that you forgot, or just talents in general. Showing you lost treasures. If we're talking about it in a financial sense, you're not going to dig up buried treasure, and you're not going to suddenly become the captain of industry that you think you want to be. However, he might show you a trick or teach you a skill you didn't realize you had already. A hidden treasure in your own world, or maybe a wealthy benefactor will appear in your life and give you support. But this is when you work with him. I got the distinct impression that he didn't give me anything. I got the distinct impression that what he did was remove blockages. He removed things from my own thought process. Because a lot of people may not realize that even though I'm a professional at this, and of course, people are going to one day, when I get 100,000 subscribers or something, say, what a sellout Thorne is. Look at all the stuff he's selling. People don't realize how actually anti-materialist I tend to be. and how little I actually wanted to focus on anything business at all. If anything, the reason why I make a little bit of a show of selling my books and my Teespring stuff, and speaking of Teespring stuff, you're modeling one of my shirts, I noticed.
Oh, yes. Trinity,
the Trinity.
My favorite symbol.
As much as I do that, it's with the intention of reaching a point where I don't have to worry about it anymore, where I can be comfortable enough where I don't want to say autopilot because we always need that stress, but I want to reach a point where I'm not thinking about being rich or having money, or I want to be able to do what I want to do, share my work, do my work, and not try to worry about making money. I would love to get to that point. And it gets closer all the time. I mean, it's definitely on the spectrum of what's happening to me, what's manifesting for me. But, so when I worked with King Person, it was almost like he said, listen, it's okay if you want to profit and prosper off of what you're doing. I already knew that, but it was like it fully dawned on me. It's like I knew it was there in my mind, but I felt still a little shame. I felt a little shy about saying I've got this. I mean, I always do it, but I always feel dirty. I feel like I don't want to say that I have a super chat, that I have this and I have that. And he's like, no, people who are going to respect you are going to respect you anyway. And people who aren't going to respect you just because of that, well, then your message is not for them. If your message offends them because you give 90% of what you do away for free, and you say, if you want to support me, buy my books, if that offends them, then your message isn't for them. So why worry about it? And I said, yeah, that's a good point. So it was more of a detangling or an unstucking of what I was doing to myself. And I feel like the spirits will come into our energy field. They will see these imbalances and they will right them somehow. They will find a way to balance them. And in that balancing, it's kind of like if you take a rubber band and you pull it really tight. So imagine, like, that's the tension, okay? And if you let go, it's going to snap. Now, of course, the metaphor, we can take it too far or maybe not far enough. When you let that rubber band go, what does it often do? It hits you. Whereas if you let go both at the same time, it'll go somewhere, right? If you go like this and let it go, it'll shoot across the room. Well, the goal is to get it to go across the room. So you've got to let go of the blockage, and then you've got to let go of that energy that it's got with it and let it fly. And maybe that's taking the metaphor too far, but I feel like that's what it felt like. I felt like I had this tension. I was holding something in tension. And he's like, don't worry about it. In fact, here, let me show you a talent you haven't used in a while. Let me get you back into painting for a little while. I'm like, okay. And he didn't do that, but I felt that. I felt that inspiration. I wanted to draw and paint, like, constantly. And so I just did. And I rediscovered that I'm not that bad at it, So I let go of the tension of money. And then when I let go of that tension, I also let go of my holding on to those little pieces. And so I made the Teespring store and I did that stuff. And, I'm not saying it's the greatest success ever, but it's people buy a few things from it. And I feel like I got around that, that hesitation. So, yeah. So Bune comes to you guys and agrees to work with you guys just because you were nice, just because you were pleasant and special.
Too much, and I guess there wasn't really a lot of what we would now call, for lack of a better term, demonolatry going on. I think most Thelemites that worked with the Goetia did pretty much straight Solomonic, and they probably brought a lot of the Crowley and Machismo into it as well.
Yeah.
And of course, LeVay had already said, very, very wisely that you're not going to get very far by approaching the spirits in a hostile manner. And in his own way, Michael Bertio was saying very much the same thing around the same time. But still, a lot of the people who had that insight weren't working Goetia, and a lot of the people who were working Goetia were still working it in the context of what was effectively biblical mythology.
Yep.
And so I guess there weren't a lot of us who were at that time, circa 1990, who were really approaching the goetic spirits in that way. So now
I find it interesting that now, at least on social media, maybe in private practice, there's a lot of them. I don't run into a lot of Solomonic practitioners, at least not for Goetia. You'll find a lot of people who still use the symbolism, the story, the stuff like that, but not many people actually go to the trouble of doing it that way. And if they do, they'll use the symbolism, but then they won't be disrespectful about it. They'll maybe, instead of using angel names or tetragrammaton or any of that stuff, they'll use names that are, we'll say, more respectful to the spirits that they're calling upon, and they won't throw, threats at them. They will request that they come. And this, it begs the question. It was a question I asked myself right off the bat. What's the point then of half of this stuff? What is the deeper meaning of the symbols, the triangle, the circle, all of this stuff? If it's not necessary, if these spirits can come and go without that, which seems clear, even as a novice, this seems clear to most people that it's not necessary. So why do it that way? Unless you were a Christian, which would, I guess, put it in the category of Christianized magic or Judeo-Christian magic, Abrahamic magic. If you're not in that spectrum, why do it that way?
Well, I ran into in my researches recently a rather interesting theory on that I hadn't thought of. I forget whether it was I forget in whose book I read it. It might have been Arundel Overman or it might have been Jake Stratton Kent. But in one of the two, they made the point that a lot of the content of things like the Lemegeton and even the Grimorium Verum or the Grand Grimoire may have been intentional blinds in the sense that this person theorized that in actual fact the Goetic sorcerers who were working with these demons back in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance may have actually, in their own practice, approached them in the same in the same respectful way that we do, but they wrote all of these bindings and curses as a cover so that if they had to justify themselves to the inquisitors, no, we're being we're being good Christians. We're calling upon the Most High and His holy angels to bind and subjugate the evil demons.
And a lot of people don't realize that kind of witchcraft was not universally, but much more acceptable throughout even the witch hunting era. You could do magic. You just had to do it in a certain spectrum. You could not worship other beings. You could not be a devil worshiper. You couldn't, and they often. This is why you had people who would be doing these occult works and not being burned at the stake for it, not being put in the Inquisition. And of course, it varied in the region, don't get me wrong. It's not like it was universal, but I've read to that effect, at least in passing. So I might have my dates and figures wrong, but the point is still valid that it wasn't universally something that got you killed unless you were, like you said, not following the expectations. If you're calling upon, Yahweh, if you're calling upon that specific, Elohim, if you're not calling upon that, then you're in trouble. But if you are, you tend to be okay. And so that's important because let's not forget my favorite symbol is the circle and the triangle in particular. The triangle is always the gate, right? Because it's the minimum number of sides that you need to create a doorway. You need to have a minimum of 3, which means it's a very low energy requirement to create a portal out of 3 shapes, about 3 sides, 3 corners. Some might say a circle, but a circle, it's kind of like, I'll put it to you this way. When I was studying martial arts for years, we used to have this little meme that would go around, this trope that would go around, and it's true, that things like rapier blades are triangular in shape, and assassin blades and bodice daggers, they're triangular in shape because when they stab, the wound is very difficult to heal. More difficult than a puncture, more difficult than a cut. Because something about the shape, it's harder for it to close up and heal. And I think, like I said, that there's something to that. I mean, in a spiritual sense, I've tried different gate shapes, and I've tried using the Goetic seals as gates, which I think is the right way to use them, or at least as the key of the gate, if nothing else. When I use them as a circular puck, like the way they're often shown in the works, and let's not forget the original versions didn't necessarily have sigils. They certainly didn't have like the illustrations that we're used to seeing these days if we Google it all. A lot of this stuff has been built up over time and added into the system in drips and drabs. And let's not forget the original Goetia was a product of, I think it's more of a fraudulent work than anything. I think they took the list of spirits from, Johann Weyer and the Pseudomonic, I'm never going to say it right, Pseudomonicia Demonium, made this into a grimoire and sold it to rich nobles everywhere. But I find that, when we're looking at these sigils and we're using them as a puck, I don't feel like they work as well. I transfer them onto a triangular piece of paper. And I use that instead as a small gateway or as a small, and this is why you'll see in my work, I don't use the circular sigil paper and burn that. No, I use it as a triangular puck, a triangular wedge. And when I hold it, I visualize this as a gateway opening into often a triangular shape in my environment. If not, I envision it almost going through my hand, through another dimension, if you will. I charge that with energy. I'll put it on my altar so it's standing up, because there is some controversy and some question about whether that triangle of art is meant to be on the floor, vertical, or at a 45-degree angle. And some people feel very strongly that it should be one, the other, or whatever one of those three. I find that it really depends. I see it almost like that portable hole from Looney Tunes, where you could like throw the hole on the wall and now you got a hole. I feel in a very similar way that when you put these in your environment, you can create these as portals, as doorways, and as keys. They're both. It's like a big door, where if you draw the right shape on it, it'll open. That's almost how I picture it in my mind's eye sometimes. So let's get to some of the chat, because I've been ignoring that because we've been just chatting away here. Let me scroll, because I think I missed like an hour's worth. For those of you who want to ask questions of me or my guests, if you would like to ask a question and have it read and have us deal with it, there are two easy ways. As long as you make it noticeable, you can put it in all caps, or you can of course do super chat. And some of you know how to highlight my name, and that always helps. I noticed that. Amanda, she says, yeah, now that you mention it, not many Solomonic practitioners out there these days. So I mean, this is, so if you guys have any questions, put them on the screen now and I'll get to them. I see you guys have been chatting away about Angel and other team, Buffy and all this. We must have been talking when we were talking about pop culture references. There's a lot of that going on. Just a lot of discussions. Apparently, my good friend is out in Somalia right now, I think is the joke that's going on, or the story that he's telling. Or I don't know what he's telling right now. I'll have to go through there and find out what he's talking about. Yeah, Lowland Azine. I think I got it better this time. Saramadus is correct. The Solomonic texts are entry points masked in negatives to ward off the arrogant, and I would also include ignorant, of course. Now that you say it like that, I feel a connection to that. I feel a truth in that. I really do. I do believe that there was a lot of forgery going on. I do believe that a lot of that was the work of charlatans that we got in our hands now as the Goetia. But I feel like that is a rational explanation. I really do. I really feel like that's a rational explanation. It really feels right, because one of the things that I approached the spirits with was, how come some people can work with you using these disrespectful means and others don't? What do you punish them? Like, how do you, are you really subjugated to King Solomon, who I'm sure these rituals are not really King Solomon's rituals. They're just a story using King Solomon's name to make them sound useful. And they kind of, obviously when I communicate with spirits, it's not like I'm talking to you where we sit around, have tea, and it's blah, 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 blah. It's impressions, it's sudden downloads of ideas, it's inspiration, it's little whispers, it's all different kinds of things. And what I got from the various times I asked this question was that they will allow it because they're not really offended as easily as people say. They're not like, a lot of people are scared of the spirits in voodoo and things like that because they seem to be so easily upset. If you didn't do the right thing, they can curse you 10 times because you didn't use the right, liquor or something like that. And I guess people expect the goetic spirits to be like that because, of course, they have a bad reputation as demons, of course. But I've never experienced that. They always seem to be, if you show your strength to them without being cruel, necessarily, if you're being respectful to them, but you're having an authority in yourself, because you have to have like quite a set of cojones to call upon a demon, right? I mean, you can't just be some person who goes, well, maybe they'll help me. No, you got to have some confidence to really go at them and approach them, because maybe that's why they wear that mask as a demon, to see who will come to them, see who has the capacity to. It's kind of like if the creepy alien shows up and it's got a heart of gold but nobody knows about it, it's going to judge people based on who approaches it, who can see through that creepy alien look. When the little girl walks over and goes, "Hi, Mr. Weird Alien," he's going to show her the universe, but everybody else gets the laser beams, kind of thing. But I asked them, like, why do you not punish these people when they treat you disrespectfully, when they do all this? And it was kind of like, in a roundabout way, the explanation I got was kind of like when a child, a little toddler, little 2 or 3, 4-year-old, 5-year-old maybe, comes up and hits you. They might scold you, or they might just brush it off like it doesn't. How can you hurt a god? You know what I mean? Baal, for example. How can you hurt that being with a little, brass burner with smelly, substances in it? How burning them in there? How is that hurting them? How is that doing any harm? How are you putting them in any kind of harm? How are you offending them? It's really just, you're just being rude to them. You're being nasty to them, and they don't have to respect you for that. But why do they need to retaliate? It would be kind of like if you're in your room alone and you decide to say, D.H. Thorne's a fat jerk, I hate him, and I never hear it, or even if I did, and I've got 300 people in a video praising me, what do I care what that one person who's flicking me, is really saying? So all I'm saying is that I went from being extremely opposed to people using Solomonic systems, and then I softened a little bit and said, you use whatever you want, but understand the tone you're using. It's not going to kill you. They're not going to come after you. They're not going to destroy you. They're not going to ruin your life. But understand the tone you're using. And if they respond to you using that system, maybe it's because you are growing. And maybe they're hoping you will see that your judgment of them in the universe is biased and based in improbability. But then there is the one final possibility, and this is one that doesn't get talked about a lot, because as demonolators, which is, the spectrum that we're on, at least that I'm on, there is this expectation that the spirits are always external, that they are separate, that they're individual in such a way that they exist completely independently from us. Whereas I am of the type of person who says to you, yes, they are an individual being that exists separate from you in that same way you and I do. However, they're also part of your higher self. They exist on that spectrum of energy, which is part of your higher true self. And when you're connecting with them, you're connecting with the aspect of your higher self as much as you are an individual entity external to you. It would be almost like putting a hand puppet on and talking to it, and it actually having a mind of its own a little bit. It wouldn't be too far off from that, maybe, idea. So if you're hurting this thing, you're really hurting yourself in a real way. But it wouldn't necessarily want to destroy you because of it. Why would it want to destroy you? You're calling upon it. So when you're using the Solomonic methods, and you're doing your rituals, and you're commanding the spirits to obey you and destroy your enemy or solve a problem for you, you're actually kind of commanding your higher self at the same time. You're kind of, and I don't mean command, don't forget in my last video about intention and all of that, don't forget that lesson that's in that series of, in that lecture. But it's kind of, you're trying to command your higher self, and sometimes your higher self is going to listen and say, yeah, I was planning on doing that anyway. And it's using the mechanic of you commanding it to rationalize it. So
then too, while we may have been around for many lifetimes, all of us have been in this physical incarnation for a duration of time, which, from the perspective of spirits who have been in a particular discarnate form for millennia, we're all like the little child approaching the scary alien as far as they're concerned. And so I would imagine, unless you're dealing one that is particularly irascible, that they would be more than likely to give some instruction. Hey, hey, easy. You can be more polite about that. A good third-party anecdote that I just read recently in Michael Cecchitelli's introduction to his book Crossed Keys, which is his combined translation of the Black Dragon grimoire and the Enchiridion of Pope Leo. Mm-hmm. And he describes how when he first started working with the Black Dragon, he had actually been used to working with spirits in a much more respectful way. But the first time he was going to work with this grimoire, he decided to just work with it as written. And the spirit that he called, I forget which one it was, showed up and was very, very sarcastic with him about all the threats and stuff, but simply responded, but you proposed to make me an offering, which I would have, so I'm here. And that was when he realized, hey, we can modify these methods. As a matter of fact, I think he was actually the one who proposed the theory that the hostile wording of the rubrics in these grimoires may have actually been a blind to throw the Christian inquisitors off track.
Mm-hmm. I love that theory. I do love it. I'm gonna explore that and research it a little bit. I'm surprised it was never just said to me. That's an interesting interesting idea. A lot of times I get these little nuggets. I'm surprised I never heard that. I do love that idea. I'm surprised it never even occurred to me just as a logical thing. I'm not a stupid guy. It's pretty. I love that idea. I really do. So let's see here.
To go on with the overall outcome. The seer kind of played his cards close to his vest with what he was asking of the spirit, and so he never really told me. And then about a couple of years later, I moved away from that metropolitan area and lost touch with him for about 20 years, and then hooked up with him on Facebook a couple of years ago. Now, when we had performed that working originally, I was, I think, in my mid-30s, and he was in his early 20s. Fast forward about 20 years, he would have been in his 40s at the time. And the main thing I noticed seeing him on Facebook was the fact that other than he had taken to shaving his head, and the fact that he had also gotten a suntan, whereas he had been very pale in his younger days, he had not aged a day since I'd seen him 20-some years before. That gave me a clue as to one of the things he might have asked for.
Really? Yeah, he might be the Saint Germain. It is remarkable, and I there's some things that I've noticed. All right, and I've mentioned this in a few streams so far. When working with all of you people in this community, a lot of us who have success in magic and a lot of experience, and we seem to have a calling for it, there does seem to be certain tendencies in us. It's not always a given, by the way. If you're watching this doesn't mean anything specific. It's just ironic to me, interesting to me, that so many people that are into this path who have success and they devote themselves to it, they have visions, they have this connection. We're often tall, we're often a little unusual in our proportions, in our height, in our whatever, and it does seem to be that there is some kind of we'll say I don't want to say biological, but some kind of a tendency for us to manifest as different, at least in the sense that we need to feel like an outcast. We need to feel separated from the rest of the herd a little bit. We need to feel unusual, and practice things to kind of, I don't want to say compensate, but maybe that's the right word for that feeling of separation. What do you think about that? Have you noticed any of that kind of thing? And Zion Scribe says, "What do you mean, you people?" With the No, that's not what I mean.
Yeah, you're right. I've noticed that in years of moving in occult circles, and I was always reminded of the saying attributed to Heraclitus that happy men do not philosophize.
True.
That it seems to take someone who's kind of alienated from the collective consensus worldview to start pursuing byways of knowledge that are still in various ways forbidden. I mean, we may not have inquisitions going nowadays, although I think if certain fundamentalist sects had their way, that might change.
Including some in the occult community.
That's true. Yes.
let's not split words a little bit. That's true. I mean, I see it all the time with the witch wars and the drama going on in the community. It drives me up a damn wall. I have people that I'm friends with, and they're fighting. It's like, what is wrong with you people? He's not legitimate. She's not legitimate. Okay, stop.
I've often commented on that. Hey everyone, remember, there are people out there that if they were not restrained by the Constitution and the rule of law would probably delight in burning us all at the stake or hanging us.
Mm-hmm.
As
we don't
Ben
have to
Franklin
be united
put
in
it,
belief.
we would do well to hang together, lest someday we end up hanging separately.
Yep, exactly. I mean, we don't have to be united in belief, but we need to be united in community, in culture, in something. And this is one of the things I do love about the left hand, is that there is, and I'm not saying it's unique to the left hand, but there is a very strong core of the left hand that does not try to invalidate other people's spiritual beliefs. It seems to be, it does exist elsewhere. I have a pagan friend that I talk to online, and he was talking to me about stuff and how the group that they were in were very much about that. They were very much about having, your personal spiritual truth is your personal spiritual truth, and none of us can really correct it. I'm not saying that, of course there's some gray area. There's some things where we can say, well, I've never experienced that, I disagree. It's not that you can't disagree, but there has to be a sense of your personal experience with the spirit even is your own. We have to avoid, making a religion out of the pantheon of the Goetia. We have to avoid, this is the only truth, that this is the only way you can see this spirit. Because I really think that's a travesty. Spiritual seeking should be open-ended. One of the things I like about Hindu culture, Indian culture, at least the idealized expression of it, is that if someone, I think Sadhguru put it this way, if someone goes out tomorrow and starts worshiping a tree as God, no one's going to question them about it. No one's going to give them a hard time about it. No one's going to call them crazy. They're going to believe that, yes, it's very possible that a God manifested as this tree for you. And Sam said, the strange and accepting. I'm telling you, we're all in the island of misfit toys, okay? As occultists, we are really, I love that trope, that meme. I love that, that we're all here.
Metaphor.
I love that metaphor, yeah. I think it's a beautiful metaphor that we're all here on the island of misfit toys, because I always found, that was my favorite part of that show. I mean, that whatever, the animated show. So, yeah. And Zion Scriven points out very correctly, because everything happens internally. So one's reality is the same. So no one's reality is the same as another's. And it's so true.
And thus people get very different gnosis of the same deity or spirit.
And yet there'll be a thread. There's almost always a thread where you say, yeah, that sounds like what they would do. Or, yeah, I got that too. Or that sounds just like them. Perfectly, exactly sounds like them. Yeah, I mean, it's really remarkable, and that's one of the ways that you validate a spiritual communion. For those of you who are novices, I know some of you constantly send me messages and ask me questions, and some of you have like real concerns that you're doing it right. And I always tell you, work with the spirit, then validate it. Don't be afraid. You don't have to research every grimoire that's ever been written about a spirit before you start working with it. Open your Goetia, go to your ritual space, or just go for a walk. Do whatever method you use to make contact, and then validate it with someone who's had that contact, or then start researching and see, did you have a similar thing? And if you don't get spine tingling chills running up and down your spine when you hit on those things that were the same or similar, you're probably doing it wrong. You know, you'll probably have moments where you go, holy crap, I had no idea, and this other person had the same experience as I did. It will happen for you. It's one of the things that caused me to come back to magic, was when I validated it that way a few times. I said, I can't deny this anymore. I'm having these experiences. I can't deny them anymore. So I think it's really useful. So I think we're going to wrap it up in a minute. We've been going for about an hour and 15. So we'll keep it to about an hour and a half tonight. So if anybody has any last minute questions or comments they want me to read, I don't think I missed any, but if I missed them, feel free to repeat them. There is, of course, super chats that do stand out. But yeah, let's see.
Meanwhile, just to sorry.
No, I meant that for you. Make any comments.
I was just going to say, to kind of complete the story of my experience with Bunet, what I had asked was, at the time, I was editing the newsletter for an organization of professional investors who were exploring technical analysis of the stock market. And I asked Bunet basically for gnosis concerning the hidden occult mysteries of finance. And well, one of the first things that wound up happening was the company I was working for got torn to pieces in a lawsuit. But observing it carefully, I was able to figure out quite a few things about the relationship between money, the legal system, and politics. And then after that, things fell into place such that I was able to begin my present career in information technologies. And it took decades, but over the course of the decades, I found that each door that closed for me in my career, a better one opened, and my material circumstances continued to improve. Mm-hmm. And also, all sorts of information and gnosis kept coming to me about the relationship of money and finance to things like alchemy and mm-hmm. to various hidden aspects of history. So, looking back on it, I've often expressed gratitude that yes, I got exactly what I wanted in terms of gnosis, and I also got a great deal of what I was thinking but did not verbalize in terms of improvement of my my material life and circumstances.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing how that works, and I found that I didn't ask for riches or comfort or wealth or anything, but I did ask for a successful book, and I asked for one, and I got two. I asked to be an influencer, if not a legendary name in the occult, for a long time to come. I wanted to be someone who would be remembered. And I can safely say that my books achieved that. If I drop dead tomorrow, well, first of all, my books would probably sell like hotcakes because I died. Like all artists, you're only recognized when you're dead. But I've left a mark. It may not be the biggest mark. There'll be people who've never heard of me. There are plenty of people who've never heard of me. But I've left a mark. There's people who are going to pass on the little tidbits that I've been able to dredge up from the depths of my experiences that people have found value, and they're applying to their lives, and they're reciprocating in their own way. That's empowering me as they're doing that. The more you use my magic, the more powerful my magic becomes, of course. So as this happens, I've found that I think what happens is a lot of times the spirits will remove things from your path that distract you from the ascension that you are truly trying to experience. You don't have to ask for them specifically because you don't always know what they are. They just reveal those things. And it's not because they're nice people. It's not because they're compassionate and selfless and they just love helping. They're not, like a Yahweh type spirit, but they do have, it's like their purpose almost is to do those things, is to be part of our experiences, which leads me to the belief that maybe perhaps they were created in some capacity by us in antiquity. Either way, they work, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. So Sam asked a good question. Those of you who have been following me on Facebook, you may know that I was very incensed by the murder of George Floyd. And it really got to me. It's part of a bigger picture. It's part of a bigger collective of real world things that are bothering me. And that was such a blatant moment. For once, there is very little doubt. I mean, there still may be some doubt, but there is very little doubt. And I did a ritual, very short one, using this pedestal altar that I set up here. Little pedestal brazier. It's basically like a candlestick with a candle holder on it. It's like a metal plate. And I set up a very short ritual to destroy him. And unfortunately, I feel like I'm still attached to it, so I may have to cut the attachment a little bit more. It may not work. You know, I'm being sincere right now. I was so vexed by this, and because I keep talking about it, it's probably going to be held back a little bit. So just so you guys know, I'm being honest about what works and what doesn't. There's a good chance that my influence may not be what does it. But I wanted to give that to the world. And I did that ritual. I shared the write-up, very short. It'll probably take you 5 minutes to do. It's on my Facebook page with a short video of me completing the ritual so that you can see what I'm doing. Well, of course, I had to use grave dirt because my favorite curses often involve a little bit of grave soil, right? And Sam asked, you know, what role or what does grave dirt do? Wouldn't it be associated with the person in the grave somehow? So grave soil is one of those things that it's like any other medium or tool in magic. There's a lot of symbolism associated with it. One of the things I like about it is it's a fairly universal symbol. It's not like a word which can have a million different meanings in different countries. It's not even like an herb which can be treated differently by different people. It is a substance which generally everybody knows what it symbolizes. It symbolizes, well, what do I have to tell you? I mean, it symbolizes all of these macabre things, these dark things, the peace of the grave, the disturbance of the grave. And when you're going and you're taking the grave soil, without a doubt, in 90% of the cases, you're defiling it, because I guarantee you that the family or the occupant of that grave is not interested, or at least wouldn't have been in life, with your practice of magic. They probably would have found it offensive to them. So almost every time you do that, you are defiling something. Okay, let's keep that in mind. This is almost the essence of that no taboos side of black magic. Okay, when we're doing black magic, there's almost always this need to express or experience or be participant in a taboo for black magic to really, 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 especially for baneful purposes. Okay. A lot of the things that we do, we don't think of as that bad. Like when you're cutting yourself, putting some blood on things, to someone in the past, that was hardcore. Like you're putting blood on something, as you know, that's something you didn't do, right? Nowadays we do this a lot. So a grave holds on to a lot of things. One of the things that I go for with grave soil, I look for a grave that has been well loved. And by that I mean someone who's been just recently buried, where the thing is piled up with decorations. And I get the impression that a lot of people mourned over this person's loss. I want all of that suffering that has been cast upon that grave and has become part of the makeup of that soil to be used in my ritual. So I collect that respectfully as I can, because I'm not interested in pissing off whatever may still remain there, okay? At least not towards me. I will often make an offering to the occupant of the grave on the potential that they are still there. This offering may just be something simple. It may be a song. It may be, you know, something that I'll do at home. It may be I leave something there. And I don't do this often. You get one jar full of grave soil and you use a pinch at a time. It'll last you a long time. You know, you might only need one for years, okay? And if it's losing potency, then, you know, I don't know. That's something you got to figure out. So you give some sort of an offering to whatever might be there, but you have to remember that the occupant of that grave, in my worldview, and you may differ for you, as a non-dualist, I don't see the occupant of that grave as existing anymore. I see that, for the most part, with a few exceptions, when a person's incarnate body is over, their spirit is still, of course, existing. They have a body, they have an egregore, and then they have a consciousness. It's almost like the Egyptian ideas of Ka, Ba, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. There's at least three aspects of us. Beyond just like I described the Trinity itself. There's a mind, body, and spirit, yes. That's in that metaphysical sense. But I mean, even in the energy body sense, in the identified being sense, there is your corporeal body, there's the story, the ego, the egregore of who you think you are. And then there's the consciousness that is your higher self. Now that higher self, when you become disembodied, generally speaking, it doesn't, it varies a lot about what it does. But it often doesn't stay attached to this body because the body's done. And that consciousness wanders off and finds a new thing to focus on. Sometimes it pulls back and becomes and rejoins the source, if you will. Other times it finds another identity to inhabit. And once in a while, it will inhabit that ego continually, long after death. Now that ego is a story, and that story needs memory. It needs people to talk about it. It needs people to remember it. And they can change. This is why when you do necromancy, and I'm not an expert on necromancy by any means, but when you do necromancy, you will find that very often we experience the spirit of the dead in a form that is like what they were sometime during their life. And it's almost always going to be an incarnation of their memory that is most resonant with what we think they're like. So if I become famous the way I am, you're not going to experience my ghost as a little kid playing with his Tonka trucks. You're going to experience my ghost as D.H. Thorne, the occultist. You're not going to experience me as the future D.H. Thorne, the occultist past the grave. You're going to experience this story that you remember about me. And that is the vehicle that the consciousness will potentially inhabit afterwards. However, like all egregores or servitors, they can get a mind of their own. And they can continue on long after the conscious that animates them, that experiences them, is gone. Because your ego is not generated per se by the consciousness. Your ego is a thing your consciousness experiences. So it's independent of that ego form. So what remains behind in the grave is the story of that person. That is the anchor that the story of that person is attached to now. And when the family goes there and they work with, I say work with, like I would work with it. They go there and they mourn over it. They talk to it. You know, who doesn't know someone who goes to a grave and talks to a grave now and then? You know, people do that, and it's not weird, okay? Even atheists will do that. So people will have this egregoric memory of a person, and it is attached to that grave. So what are you taking when you take that soil, potentially? Well, that's a little subjective. That's why I like being on the left-hand path. I can choose what that means to me. Am I bringing home a fragment of that spirit? Probably not. Especially if I'm not really spending a lot of time memorizing and thinking about who was this person, etc. If it's just dirt to me, then it's just dirt. But what I see is I see dirt that has been mourned over, that has been charged with intense emotional anguish. And that dirt, like any substance that can be molded, candle wax, olive oil, all these things are really good. They're really good at receiving energies from things, right? And dirt's no different. Soil is the womb. We plant intention in womb, in soil. And so grave dirt is no different, okay? But what usually gets implanted in graves? Dead things. Things that are destroyed, things that we've destroyed. And so if you are worried about bringing with you the ghost, the egregore, or offending it, by all means hesitate, don't do it. By all means, find a way to placate that spirit. Find a way to be respectful. I do. When we took this particular batch of grave soil, my wife and I did it. I was sort of showing her how I do it. And I felt like it was necessary for her to participate strongly in doing it. And I had her go and do the majority of it, of the collection and the offering. And she knelt down and she felt the connection. She put her hand on the grave and she started crying. She felt this kind of connection to that spirit. And she felt like it was okay. And I told her, don't you dare scoop it up if you feel like it's not, just, really go, when you feel it's okay, scoop it up. Otherwise, don't do it. And, she got very emotional. And she ended up scooping it up, and it was something that we collected, and I've had it. Now, that grave soil is charged with all of that mourning, all that sorrow, all of that, everything attached to it, and maybe a little touch of joy. There's some people when they go to a funeral, I don't mean that in a dark way, I mean they're just like, I love grandma, I hope grandma has a happy afterlife, So that grave soil is charged with all of that potent energy. And what I'll do is I'll bring it home and I'll put it on my altar, and I will call upon a spirit that is aligned with the intentions I intend to use that dirt mostly for. Very rarely do I use grave dirt for, if I'm going to use it for different things, I separate it and I put it in different jars. I have a baneful jar, I might have a love jar, I might have a different kind of jar. If it's a baneful jar, then what I like to do lately is I will take my athame that's dedicated to darker spirits and I will thrust it into the soil. And I will let it sit on my altar for 3 days with offerings and things. And I will invoke specific spirits to consecrate that soil to baneful practice. This sort of, in my opinion, it helps remove any of the remnant of that spirit that was the grandma, the grandpa, whoever it was that was in that soil. Okay? And I am not unaware that I am defiling that person's memory and grave by doing that. I am not ashamed of that. I don't see it as being, I'm not one of the good guys, as I'm lately saying a lot. I mean, I might act like a good person, I might be a good, but I'm not one of the quote unquote good guys. I'm not one of the love and light types. Okay, I do what needs to be done. And it doesn't faze me. I don't have that taboo. So I will take that, if I'm going to use it for baneful, I'll keep it separate. If it's for love, I might take, as I wrote in something on Facebook, someone asked, I might take rose petals and I will break them up and put them in that jar and seal it up and give it to a spirit that is mostly attuned with that. And then I'll just store it, and I'll just maintain it. And I'll look at it once in a while, I'll feel it. I'll feel that grave intention. So this ritual I did, that's what I did. I used a pinch of that baneful soil for that purpose. So there's 101 uses for grave soil, let's be honest, right? There's a lot of energy gets poured into that. Yeah. And let's not forget, there's also a difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. I usually go to cemeteries because they're not consecrated as much. A lot of times people just get stuck in the ground and they don't have a priest do much of anything. But if you go to like a church graveyard, that's a different story. You may have to deal with removing that sanctification first because it may be sanctified to the Christian current. And you may have to, or that might actually empower it because you're really being blasphemous at that point. So you might have some fun with that. So would you add anything to that? Now that I've lectured for 20 minutes.
Well, over the years, one of the currents that I also was initiated into was what's sometimes known as hoodoo or root work and conjure, and I was taught by a couple of very traditional African American root workers in Washington D.C., who I'll refer to as Mrs. M and Mrs. W. And one of the things that I learned was, in that current it gets used a lot. And one of the traditional offerings that is always left behind when taking it is usually several coins and a small bottle of rum.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of symbolism in the various cultures why that would be relevant. Is the rum for the Baron, or is it for, and the coins, what are they? It's so, there's so much beautiful stuff going on with that. And you'll notice that while the offering may change, the idea of offering something to that spirit or the guardians of that spirit or the graveyard itself remains in almost every system that does this. And it's very interesting. It's one of those things that's, again, universal. The specifics vary. but the idea, the archetype remains. Lowland asks, does Saramadus have Facebook page or website or anything like that? I don't know. You're more of a, do you have one? I mean, you're more of like just somebody who wanted to come on and just have some fun and talk about stuff. But I don't think you're like a practicing professional at this or anything like that, right? You're not really.
That's correct. I don't yet practice professionally. As I develop my skills further, I would like to set up work doing readings at some point in the future, particularly with the tarot. Mm-hmm. I have not set up a Facebook page yet, but I could certainly do so. And if there's interest, and if it's okay, I could post the link in the Become the Maelstrom Facebook group. Yeah,
no, that'd be great. I mean, I support everybody, especially guys that, I mean, you guys support me. If you're supporting me, I feel like, it's part of what we do, right? That's the give and take of magic, isn't it? We have to, you make an offering and make a pact, right? You give and take. So, no, 100%. You can absolutely share that in there. And I'd be honored if you give me one of your inaugural readings, in fact. And I'd be honored to be one of the first.
I'd be delighted.
So let's see if there's any other. Hopefully, there's not any big questions that take 2 hours to answer. Let's see. Zion says, I feel that Gravedigger holds death energy, and when you direct that at someone who can't process it well, you know what will happen when you do that. And also remember that death energy doesn't have to mean, okay? Death energy can just mean a strong transition. You're going to be doing the tarot, as I say it. The death card, does that imply physical death? Or is it more of great change, great transition, great, and of course physical death is one possibility, right? So when we're dealing with the death current, are we always dealing with literal living deletion, shall we say?
I'm reminded, one of my personal favorite spiritual teachers, Eckhart Tolle, once said that every time you accept the present moment as it is, that is a small death of the ego.
Wow, yeah, that's so true. I recently was talking to Coetting, and we're doing things together, and I met, he was talking about something with his apocalypse stuff that he's working on. I did a video, and I said, don't forget that the idea of apocalypse happens every moment. If you really think about it, apocalypse means time of great change, if nothing else, right? Other people will put their interpretations on it. But that's really what it means. It means a great battle, of course. It's from the word, from the field, whatever. But we're talking about the implication of time of great change, okay? The time of balancing of the scales. Well, every moment that you experience is a complete rewrite of the world that was there before. Every moment is a little apocalypse, right? Every moment is a little death. And of course, I don't believe that time is real. I think time is an illusion, but we experience it, and so therefore we have to swim in that current, right? And every moment that passes is a little apocalypse. It's a little change. It's a little death. It's a little death card being handed to us. And we're reminded, if we pay attention, that death awaits us in that sense. And that's not a morbid thing. A lot of people think when like a Buddhist would say, oh, well, death awaits us all. Oh, so morbid. No, you fool. It awaits you every moment, like you just said, what Eckhart Tolle said. So it's a beautiful thing to focus on. Let's see. So I think we're just about done. Let's see if there's anything big. Good night, Suicide Bunny. We'll see you soon. We're going to be ending in a minute anyway, so you're not going to miss much. Clash of Clans boss asks, how do the Clash of Clans? Oh gosh. How does one learn to hear spirits in evocation? Okay, I've done evocation. So, I've done videos about this, and that's a long lecture potentially. There is a video, I'm trouble remembering the exact name of it. The original title was Is Your Third Eye Blind? It's maybe about a month ago I did it. I changed the title to something else. I could probably find it. But if any of you guys know which video that is, I very clearly started to point out a revelation I had where when we're seeing spirits and we're experiencing them, it's not always going to be visceral or vivid. Sometimes it's going to be very subtle, and it's going to be internal, even if it's an evocation, okay? When you're going for evocation, my strongest bit of advice to you If you're going to see, if you want to see something physical, something substantial, something that you can say, that was weird, that was wild, don't look for a flaming portal to open up in the floor and have a demon walk out. Okay, that I don't think has ever happened. And if it has, I haven't been there. That's not to say I haven't seen some weird, creepy shit that I can't explain, like shadows in the distance and weird stuff. I'm not saying I haven't seen things that for all intents and purposes, I think if I walked over and touched it, it would be there. But I have never seen that kind of Hollywood, thing. Evocation is really, in my mind, all of this spiritual context on a spectrum, and you have your evocations, and you go to your invocations and possessions. Okay, but I think they're all kind of variations of the same internal experience. As some of you in the comments have said, subjective reality is the true reality. Okay, so when you're seeing a spirit in the external environment, a lot of the times that's a visual overlay of your imagination or of your whatever. Okay, it's a hallucination. Doesn't mean it's not real. And I always have to remind people, just because there's a rational explanation for something doesn't mean it didn't happen. Okay, what the ancients somehow figured out, whether they knew it to be this way or not, some of these things that we call hallucination or psychedelic or what's the word for, like, the optical illusion, some of these things are actually keys to making your mind enter into a transcendental state where you are actually one foot on both sides of the veil. You do see the spirit world almost like an overlay, and it can be that way, even if it's just for little blinks and flashes. Okay, you have to trust your imagination to be honest with you. The key is you have to know how to do your trance work, and you have to know how to enter the proper mind state so that when you try this stuff, it's not just your imagination, because you're in a different frame of mind. If I just ask the average person right now, imagine a pink bunny, well, that doesn't mean they summon the pink bunny demon if they imagine it. But if they're in the middle of a ritual and they've tranced out and they've gone into that other space in their internal experience, and I ask them, where in the room is Asmodee right now? Now, maybe they're not technically in a spot in the room, because I believe all these spirits are non-local. They don't have a physical form the way we think of. If they do, it's spread out like an energy field. Where in this room is Asmodee right now? Well, they're going to inspire you to imagine them in a position in the room, and you're going to have to work with that. That is not an invocation. That is a very slight evocation, if you will. But I recommend anybody who's trying to do evocation use physical mediums for them to manifest within. This can be, as Saramadus was talking about with his seer, with the crystal ball. This can be in a candle flame. It can be in incense smoke. It can be in a bonfire. It can be looking for any kind of sign, symbol, or sound, like a poltergeist in your environment. My favorite evocations that I've ever done, I will say, Spirit, give me a sign, and I'll hear a thump, or something like the dishes in the drain rack will suddenly settle. That was the coolest one with King Vine. Never spoke to him before. I asked him, King Vine, please give me a strong physical sign that I cannot deny. Within 3 seconds, all the dishes in the drying rack just went clank, and they had been sitting there for hours, and it was a loud clank. I thought it woke up the house. And I almost I almost pooped myself, let's be honest. I mean, it made me jump. All right. When doing Malthus for the first time, my wife and I were sitting in the woods. Actually, it was off the side of the graveyard that we use for getting soil. We were sitting in the woods, and we call upon the spirits, and it's dead quiet up until we get about partway through the ritual, and I start saying, President Malthus, if you're here, please give us a sign. That's often my little wording. And we waited, and then suddenly we started hearing movement that we didn't hear before. It was totally quiet. We started hearing movements in the woods. Branches would fall down, almost like little animals running. This probably was little animals, let's be honest. There's probably a rational explanation for every one of these occurrences, but they happened at the synchronistic moment that I'm asking for a sign. To the point where we'd hear daybirds just suddenly start chirping in response to questions. So you need to look for the most subtle things. In other words, what I'm basically telling you to do is, for the duration of your evocation ritual, put away your skepticism. Bring it back when you're done. I'm not saying disregard it fully in your life. I'm saying, while you're in a magical state, don't be a skeptic. Pretend like a little child would do. Because little children do magic really well because they don't have that boundary of what's expected and what's not. Really allow those experiences to be real for the duration of that ritual. And I promise you, when you're done, you're going to say, those things lined up perfectly with my questions. And there was a synchronistic way that they happened that, yes, that branch falling off the tree that made a thump right when I said, give me a sign, yes, it was probably a raccoon or something. It caused the branch to fall. Why did it happen exactly when I needed it to? And this will happen sometimes once in a ritual, sometimes 5 or 6 times. You'll hear thumping, you'll hear voices in your head, you'll feel things, the temperature will change in the room. These are subtle evocation signs. Now, if you're looking to have a portal open up and a demon walk out, unless you want to go find the Eyes Wide Shut crew, and like the really high level, I don't know where they are, and I don't believe that they're doing that either. Because they understand the non-corporeal nature of the spiritual world. Look up Plato's ideas about Plato's forms and things like that. Look up these ideas that the spiritual is non-physical. It has to be. However, it will manifest in physicality. What are some good mediums? Incense, smoke, flame. Doing magic in nature. If you're going to do evocation, you want to have a good time, go by yourself several miles or hours deep into the woods. Someplace where you can't just like walk away from in 15 minutes and be back at your house with the lights on in comfort. Be somewhere where you're remote and isolated. Take an hour to walk there. Take a half hour to walk. Just make it a good long hike. Make it at least a couple miles, 2 miles, 3 miles. Into the deep woods. Light a bonfire late at night. By yourself. If it's the appropriate weather and there's not a lot of bugs, take your shirt off. Expose yourself to the elements. Give yourself every opportunity to feel everything that you can feel. Using minimal tools, light that bonfire, say your chants, work yourself up into a frenzy or a trance, whatever you need to do, and call upon that spirit. And even a friendly spirit will make the hair stand up on your arms. It happens to me. You can watch a video I did on, I think it was it New Year's? I think it was New Year's Eve. No, it wasn't New Year's Eve, but it was around that time. I forget when it was, this past year. It was the cold moon ritual. You can find that in my live streams. And I evoked a spirit during that stream, and I showed you the hair on my arms just stand straight up. And the room felt ice cold, and I didn't have the heat off. I mean, it wasn't like I was breathing fog. You can tell it was like normal. So you'll get these little signs and symbols. And they will be unmistakable. The incense will play with itself. You will see shapes in it. Now, does that mean that the spirit made it take a shape? Maybe, maybe not. This is part of that left-hand path thing. You've got to figure it out for yourself. Do you believe that the spirit made the smoke move a certain way? Or did your imagination latch onto a shape and make it turn into something in your mind? Like looking at clouds in the sky. Which one was it? So, okay. I'm gonna cut it here. Saramadus, give us one more. What did you think of that explanation? Do you differ? Do you agree? Do you have any other take on what I just said? Did I miss anything? I'm sorry, I talked so I was just sitting there just quiet.
No, I think you covered it very well, and especially the importance of the right attitude of mind, because if you approach magic with a frame of mind that it's not possible, it won't be. But if you're open, but if you're open to experiencing it, then you will experience
something.
Exactly.
I think people make the mistake of thinking it has to be like that 24/7. Like you have to have such an open mind that at any moment, now that's helpful, but don't, like my last video said, don't drive yourself crazy. Keep your feet on the ground or else the kite won't fly, okay? The kite needs to have a connection with the ground to fly. You need to have a connection with reality as you understand it. Even though you know it's an illusion, you have to be grounded in it. Otherwise, you will lose place. You will go nuts. But I do think that when you are in a magic ritual perspective, like you said, you have to be open to everything being real. no matter how skeptical you think you are. If I ever invited a skeptic in to witness my rituals, and I usually don't because they mess with my energy too much, they make me second guess myself and I get weird. If I ever invited a skeptic to witness a ritual, I would say, for the period of time that you are in this room, magic is real or you can't be here. I don't care if you have to lie to yourself. I don't care what you have to do. Go back to being 3 or 4 or 5 years old where imaginary friends aren't imaginary. You have to go back to that state or else you will not experience anything worth remembering. It'll just be D.H. Thorne stood there going bibbidi bobbidi boo over some fire.
And when it comes to the even when it comes to mundane life outside the ritual chamber, just like as it comes to meditation when you're not on the cushion, it is good to be alive to the possibility of omens and meaningful synchronicities. But at the same time, Crowley had a dictum about not mixing the planes, and it's important to realize that there are different levels things occur on. If you're in a meeting in a boardroom and things are said and things that are done that could potentially have an oracular meaning, by all means make a mental note of it, or write it down in runes or something nobody else can see in your pad folio, and come back to it later. But at the same time, keep your main focus on the task at hand.
Yeah. And you can see this in the comments even now as I'm reading the comments from when I was giving my little rant a minute ago. The person who asked the question had synchronistic explosions because, of course, they're working with Asmodee. There's about 4 or 5 people working with Asmodee today, specifically. So we all suddenly, Asmodee is calling to people today. It's a beautiful thing. Asmodee, Ashima Diva, a very cool spirit, ancient spirit that people don't even realize was once a goddess of fate that has become a demon of wrath. Very cool stuff. So, yeah, I mean, you can look in the comments. People are talking about the things that they're experiencing just while I'm talking, the synchronicities that are popping up. They're noticing it. Now, synchronicity is like a whole nother video, but look it up. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. It is probably the most meaningful manifestation of magic that I can imagine. It's actually more meaningful than if you wished for an obelisk to fall out of the sky with the name of God written on it. That'd be cool, but even that would be too cool to be real. Synchronicity is something else. It's so personal. It's so powerful. You like you said, you get chills, and it's unmistakable when you get a synchronistic moment. It is almost like I read your mind. I promise you I didn't, but it's almost like I read your mind, and you can't tell the difference. That's usually when magic's working. You can't tell the difference. All right, guys, so let's call it here. Next week, I'm going to be having a very special guest. A week from tonight, I'm going to be having E.A. Quetting is going to be on this channel talking about his new books, the one that's out now, The Compendium of Baal. We're going to be having a long discussion about that and just hanging out, two brothers in black magic, talking about everything that we like to talk about, comparing notes, seeing where we agree, where we differ, and we're going to have a good time with that. So hopefully you guys will tune in for that. Put it on your calendar. I'll be putting an announcement up probably tonight or tomorrow on my YouTube, so make sure you save the date, if you will. That's going to probably be a big one, so I hope to see you guys there. In the meantime, Saramadus, you're going to be, I guess, creating a page, and you're going to be sharing it with my group. So if you want to follow along with what I'm doing, if you're new here, you can find me on Facebook just by looking up the Demon Sorcerer Thorne. You can also find Become the Maelstrom as a Facebook group. I do have a website, but I don't really use it. It's mindtheshadows.com. I'm probably gonna repurpose that at some point. And of course, if you want to support me financially, you can always buy my books. They're linked in the description. And I do have a Teespring and a Patreon. So if you're interested, this tapestry you see behind you is a product of that Teespring store. This is for Legion. And it's actually, you can use that if you're working with Shadownomicon, which is my second book. You can actually use that tapestry in the communion ritual. You can use this, consecrate it, prepare it, whatever you feel like will make it feel special to you. Hang it in your ritual room and use that as your gateway, and you'll have some fun with it. So any final words, Saramadus, before we take off?
Just that it's been a pleasure being here, been a pleasure talking with you, a pleasure visiting with everyone, and hope we get a chance to do it again.
Amen, brother. Oh no, I said the evil word. Oh no, I said amen. I mean, Amun.
Amun, yes.
Yeah, yeah. All right, guys, have a good one. We'll check you out next time. Mind the Shadows.